Hello, this is Dave Gray, and I'm here today with Marcia Connor. Marcia is a author and a consultant working with large global enterprises, helping them change and become better than they were before. Marcia's working on a new book, and she asked me, how do I know when to draw? And so I'm just going to introduce Marcia. Hi, Marcia.
Hi, Dave.
Talk about your question for a second.
Sure. When I speak with people or I write for things that I know others will be reading, I always want to put it either in language that they can understand easily or that they resonate with. And I find that sometimes words aren't enough, either spoken words or written words. And yet there are images sometimes that will allow us to very quickly grasp a concept, often a complex idea or even a simple one, but have that sort of marker in our thoughts that allow everything to flow from that point. So I thought, wouldn't it be great if I was better at drawing, sketching some of those ideas, both the simple and the complex, to be able to share either in my consulting work or in the books and articles that I write. That makes sense?
It does. And so the question came up to you that since you sort of think of yourself as primarily a word person, that how do you know when is a good time to draw a picture?
Well, sometimes that's triggered by the look on the person's face when I can look at them and say, I probably need to explain this in a different sort of way. But there are probably other cues that you have based on your work that says this is an ideal time for drawing a picture or having a sketch. And so I'm really quite curious to learn from you, in addition to that visual feedback I get, what are some of the cues that you have that this is a terrific time to be able to draw something out? I'd like to be able to do that more often.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's get started on that. So you have a person here is confused, and this is kind of the trigger that says, okay, somehow I failed to get something across, or somehow there's something going on here. I think that there are a couple ways to think about it. One thing that's going to cause people to get confused is if you're being too abstract. Maybe you're using language or jargon that they're not familiar with, or for some reason they're having trouble connecting that to something concrete. So in that case, when things are too abstract, drawing something is definitely going to make it more concrete and specific, because just like telling a story is going to make something more concrete and specific because it puts it in a context. It's very hard to draw something that, well, something that abstract that doesn't exist.
I work really hard at not speaking in abstract terms, but yet I know that there are ways that maybe somebody has to hold too much information in their head at the same time, or
Yep.
they want to be able to relate this to something that they already know. And even if there were visual cues that they had that said how these things are related, I think that it would be more timely for them.
Absolutely.
I'm speaking with somebody about different parts. So, an example in this case, I was speaking with somebody in one part of the organization about how something works in a different part of the organization.
Hmm.
And while they could understand how it worked in their group, and they could probably also understand how it worked in the other group, the idea of relating those two is sometimes a little bit more challenging, especially if people don't do that on a regular basis.
Sure. And so too abstract is one category, but I would also put too much to hold in the head as another category, and that comes up a lot. For example, if you've got a number of things and they all have relationships with each other, one signal for this is you find yourself actually referring back to things that you said. You find yourself referring back to the same thing, like remember when I said this or remember when I said that. The chances
Mm-hmm.
are that if you see that, that's a symptom that you're describing something that is probably complex enough that it should be depicted in a picture.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you an example. This is an example that you and I talked about a week ago, which is an org chart. Let's say Jane is the CEO. We all know what an org chart looks like, right? And reporting to Jane are three people: Salim, Olivia, and Marcia. And reporting to Salim are Betsy, Dan, and John. Reporting to Olivia are Lauren, Dawn, and another John. Say John S. and John L. And reporting to Marcia are Tom, James and Judy, the J's. Okay. Now let's say that the two Johns are working on a project together, and I'm just going to put a little box around them. Well, let's see. Make that a different color. So what I'm visualizing is not just an org structure, but let's say in this group there's some cross-functional teams. So the two Johns might be working together on one team, and John is the team leader. John S. is the team leader. And we've got Lauren and Tom working on another team. And Tom is the team leader of that team. And so they're working on these various initiatives. And let's call this Initiative 1. And we'll call this Initiative 2. All right. Now, once we've got a picture like this, we can start to ask questions of the picture. We've actually drawn the whole system, and we can have a bunch of different narratives that go through it. So we can say, well, how many people on Livia's team also are working on cross-functional teams? And by looking at the picture, we can see that 2 out of 3 are, in fact, working on cross-functional teams. We can say, well, of Jane's 3 direct reports, how many have people on cross-functional teams? And we can look at this picture and say, all of them. We can ask, how many direct reports does Marcia have? We can look at this and say 3. What a picture allows us to do is have a frame of reference. And now you can be telling a story or walking through a story with someone. If you have this image on a page, you can be referencing everything to figure 1 or whatever. And so as you're walking through it, you can say, well, Euclid, if you've studied geometry, you know there's lots of that referring back to an image and say line AB, line CD, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and you actually having that picture as a reference is very powerful. I want to tell you another story. This comes from my days as a newspaper guy. So when I was working for a newspaper, I remember there was there's always these events that come in, right? And one day there was a police chase. It was a police chase all over Los Angeles. I was working for the Los Angeles Herald Examiner. So there was this police chase, and it went all over the city, and it was really dramatic, and the cops were trying to chase these guys down, whatever, and I think eventually they got them. But my job, so came into the news art department, and my job was, let's make a map of the car chase. There was the reporter on the story, and he said, how can I help? And I said, here's how you can help. Get what do they call them, the Thomas guides? So the Thomas guides were a kind of a map that basically a very, very detailed map of Los Angeles. Is a spiral bound thing. Today we have Google Maps. I don't know if some people will even remember Thomas guides, but there are these very in-depth kind of visual maps where you could actually get down to the city block and look at every single thing. So I gave him a Thomas's guide, and I said, get on the phone with the cops and have this map in front of you. Here's a pen, a pencil, and just mark the route. Mark the route on the map and come back to me with the route mapped out, and I'll make a map for the newspaper. But this guy was a word guy. And he just didn't necessarily see, I guess, the value of why he should have the map. So he just got on the phone, as newspaper guys do, and he asked the cops to say, well, tell me where the car went. And so you made a list, okay, it was on this street, it was on this street, it was on this street, and this street. So he came back to me with the list. Here you go, Dave, here's the list, the whole car chase. And it was just like I guess today we would call it a Word document, but in those days it was one of those printouts that had little perforations on the side and that you printed out from your green CRT terminal, whatever. Or it might have been just some hand penciled thing. So I took his verbal description and I pulled out my Thomas's guide and I started to draw the route map of this chase. And can you guess what happened, Marcia?
Didn't map up, didn't line up.
That's right. So it would be the car chase would be happening on this block of this street, and then suddenly, magically, the car chase would be on another block, and there would be no way for me to know how they got from point A to point B, because it would be just this magical leap. So this is another value of visual thinking, is when you're actually collecting information, if you collect it verbally, you might miss a lot of stuff. there are a lot of things that might actually be gaps and that you wouldn't necessarily fill in the gaps if you're collecting that information verbally. But if you're visualizing it all the way as you go and you're collating that with something, whether it's a map or something else, then you're gonna see the gaps. They're gonna show up in the picture. Another example is I was doing a thing with a large consumer goods manufacturer and a large consulting firm, and they had this kind of 4-week sales and operations planning cycle. They had these cycles and they had people's jobs that were going to happen along the course of this, I think it was a 4-week cycle. And so they had inputs and outputs and people who were generating reports. And as we were visualizing this on the wall, it became obvious, just really obvious, that this person was going to need, on week 3, I guess, they were going to need to generate a report. But the information that they needed to generate the report wasn't going to be available until week 4. So it was basically an impossible situation. And these consultants had basically this 3-inch thick binder of stuff. They had thought through this whole process without, and this was about to launch. They had thought through this whole process without actually visualizing it. And because they had not visualized it, there was a huge, huge time bomb that was waiting. As soon as they had launched this, would have become evident to everyone in the company, and it would have been very embarrassing to them. And because we were visualizing it in advance, they were able to solve that.
So those are eye-opening thinking, of all the problems that happen in our world, but people can't see it. So when things are too abstract, when there's too much information to hold. I love the example of remember when I said that as a great sort of tip or trick to be able to say, oh yeah, that's a good cue that it would be good to draw a picture here. So if there are other sorts of those, here's a good time, here's not a good time, just for us to have those little rules inside of us that just say, this is one of those times, let's do this.
The 2 examples I shared, the newspaper one of the cop chase and also the consumer goods manufacturer where they're planning a complex process. Whenever you're dealing with something that's more complex than you can hold in your head at one time, you should always draw a picture of it. You should always visualize it, because if you don't visualize it, you're creating a situation where you're basically risking that you're missing something really important that could be very embarrassing later. And even if you don't share that picture, just to do it for yourself as part of your thinking process, because what a picture does is it puts all that stuff in one place. Well, thank you, Marcia. I appreciate your being with us today. Thank you.
Happy to be here.